Great. So we're going to give folks a few more minutes to join us. It's not quite 4:30 and we are expecting 6 or 7 more people. We do have one attendee. I see Joanne is in the attendees area. I might.
Yes, I'm going to promote Joanne to a panelist.
Great. And here's Linda and Amy. Welcome.
Sorry about that. I clicked the wrong link.
You made it to the right place.
Thank you.
And John Previtali is in a moving car.
You're right back.
Okay.
I'll be right back too.
All right, we're going to start in about 2 minutes.
Now, John, you might have a little trouble with the writing exercise that we have on the agenda. Just kidding. No writing exercises for this meeting.
Hey Barry, do you hear background noise from my car? Is it all right if I stay off mute? Should I go mute?
John, we don't hear any. I don't hear any background noise. I don't know about anyone else, but
Okay.
I think, yeah, we may ask everyone to start off on mute just until we're all here. And in general, I think when we have our group conversations, we'll ask everyone to unmute. But for right now, it's fine to remain on mute. And we'll start in just a minute. It's 4:31, so give folks 1 or 2 more minutes to join us.
Sounds good.
I think we're missing 3 people. Four people, actually. Here's Danielle. Welcome, Daniel. And for those who are in the attendees area, welcome as well. We'll give it maybe 1 more minute and we'll get started, and other folks can join us in progress if they will be logging in. Here's Omar. Okay, we can start now. Good afternoon, Omar.
Hello, everyone.
Ali and Jake, is it all right if we begin? So
I say let's do it.
All right. So I'm going to do the official welcome today. We're going to each welcome you in a moment, but we thought we would start with the The recording of members who are present and absent, there is a printed agenda for the meeting, which you hopefully all received. So this is going to be just an alphabetical roll call, and we will take it from there. So Omar Carrera.
Here.
Okay. Don Dickinson. I don't see Don here yet, but I believe he's going to be joining us. Andrew Henning is excused today. Linda Jackson.
Here.
Hi, Linda. Lorenzo Jones.
Hi, I'm here.
Great. Cesar Lagleva.
Here.
Great. Amy Lykover.
Here.
Thank you. Diana Lopez.
Here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Rena Lopez.
Here.
Okay. Tom Monahan. I don't see Tom here yet, so hopefully he'll be joining us. John Prevatali.
Here.
Okay. Daniel Ryan.
Here.
And Joanne Webster.
Here.
Great. So I think we have 2 members who are missing and 1 who is excused. Hopefully our missing members will join us. We don't have any meeting summaries to accept since this is really intended to be a meet and greet. We have 2 items we wanted to talk with you about today. The first is just to spend some time on introductions and all getting acquainted with each other and talk a little bit about what we're going to do as a working group. And then we have a presentation that Jacob and I will walk through that gives you kind of an overview of the housing element and a little bit of information about our process and the objectives for this group and the timeline for our meetings and for the housing element preparation and adoption. There are a couple of just housekeeping announcements at the end. I do want to point out we have time for public comment at the end of the meeting. In future meetings, we will likely put public comment on at the beginning of the agenda and at the end of the agenda for those who can't wait through the entire meeting or would rather just do something else. I don't know why they would, but anyway, just to put that out there. So with that, I think what I'd like to do is introduce Community Development Director Ali Judici to begin the introductions, and we're going to do staff introductions first, and then we'll move on to the working group members. We've allowed 40 minutes to do this, so it's not just a quick introduction. We'd love for you to talk a little bit about why you're interested in this subject, kind of what your connection is to San Rafael and to issues around housing, and how this affects you personally. And with that, I'm going to introduce Ali, and I think there is someone trying to log in that is pinging me, so I'll deal with that. Ali, why don't you take it away? Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. I want to personally thank you for participating in this housing element update. Housing is very important to me. It represents the purpose for everything we do in community development. It's clear as we do everything, all the work, that everything's kind of interconnected and leads back to the same place, housing for all. The housing element is going to be an opportunity for you all to identify the community's housing needs and to define the best way to provide clean, safe, affordable housing for all of San Rafael residents. I know that you all could be anywhere tonight, but you're here, and some of us are, at least one of us is risking their lives to participate in this process. So I really am grateful for that. I know that it's going to be a great conversation. It'll be a robust conversation, and you'll be able to help mold or help identify how to best address housing needs, fair housing, and remove barriers to housing as part of this housing element. And for that, I just want to say that I am grateful. I know we are all grateful. With that, I want to go ahead and kick it off to Jacob.
Well, good evening. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of meeting so far. I know that I have met some of you. I am the City of San Rafael's incoming housing programs manager. This is a new role for the city. I believe that there hasn't been a housing programs manager or a role like this since around perhaps 2012. And so it's been great to be here, but I think I'm just out past my 60 days with the city. I'm very excited to be a part of this effort and to be working with all of you on building out the housing element update for San Rafael. So I'll pause there and invite Alexis Kaptanyan to introduce herself.
Thanks, Jake, and good evening, everyone. My name is Alexis Kaptanyan. I am the Housing Programs Analyst at the City of San Rafael. I joined the team in mid-September and am looking forward to working with all of you on the housing element update. My background is in public health and community mental health, so that's one of the lenses that I bring when I think about housing and how important it is for everyone to have a safe, secure, affordable place to call home. So with that, I think I'll pass it. Am I passing it back to Jake or to Barry?
Pass it back to
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. And by the way, Don Dickinson is trying to log in, so he may be joining us momentarily. I gave him my login, so there will be multiple Barrys on the screen. I'll do a quick intro for myself, and then we'll maybe go alphabetically through the steering committee members. I am Barry Miller. I'm the consulting project manager for the housing element update. I was previously the consulting project manager for the general plan update, which was just adopted by the city council in August. And that was a 3.5-year effort to move the needle forward for San Rafael's long-range plan for its future from 2020 out to 2040. And so there was a large steering committee that was created to guide that process, and we worked together to come up with some really effective policies that we're looking forward to implementing through this housing element. And my background is that I've been an urban planning consultant for my entire career, which is about 35 years. I have worked in the Bay Area most of that time and have done housing elements for a number of cities, all in the East Bay. So this is my first Marin housing element. I'm excited about the challenge. Glad it's San Rafael. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you on the project. So I mentioned we will go alphabetically, and that would have Omar leading us off. Just a couple of words to introduce yourself, Omar.
Thanks, Barry. Just introducing my name and organization, or you want me to expand on why this issue is important?
Yeah, if you could maybe tell us why it's important, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Omar Correa, CEO of Canal Alliance. Housing for us, Canal Alliance is the center of everything that we do. So there is no, we cannot be thinking about education success or employment success unless we help essential workers secure affordable housing. So it's the front and center of the mission of Canal Alliance. We are also homeowners, so we provide, we own buildings in the canal, one of the few affordable housing units that exist in the canal. And this is very important to us because here we're gonna be discussing the future of housing for San Rafael, not just in terms of development, but protections. You know, we need to be talking about tenant protections. One of the things that we learned through COVID-19 is the low-income communities, low-income tenants are the ones who are disproportionately impacted by any crisis that we face.
Thanks, Omar. Let's go to Linda.
Hello, everybody. Well, Linda Jackson, and I am a representative of Sustainable San Rafael, which fights climate change through economic policies, environmental protection, and equity. And I'm also a representative of the Marin Environmental and Housing Collaborative, which also fights climate change through affordable housing and environmental protection and equity. So I'm honored to be here for representing them. I lived 2 years in the Peace Corps in Ecuador. I've lived in a tent and one summer in Alaska when housing was really expensive. I've lived in a car traveling through Mexico in a Volkswagen van and a post office van. So I've lived in a house that I owned, and now I live in an apartment that I rent with my husband. We raised 4 children, 4 daughters here in San Rafael. My day job is as a program director for the Aging Action Initiative. My night job, my volunteer job is I'm a trustee on the San Rafael Board of Education. And I know we may talk about housing sites on school sites, so I'm going to recuse myself from those conversations. I just want to say it's Shangri-La living in downtown San Rafael. It's a beautiful place. Home is shelter. A house is shelter and a house is home. And this is something that everybody deserves. And it's a basic right of every person. So it's our work in San Rafael. Having been someone who worked as a planner in San Rafael for many years, written the housing element, I know this is the heart of what we do and what we'll be talking about. I'm glad to be with you all.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Lorenzo?
Hi, everyone. I wear many hats. One of the hats that I wear is the Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Eden Housing, based in Hayward. And we have over 10,000 homes that we provide. And so imagine running a race, a lap, and you start off, everyone starts off, but you give someone a 30-yard or 40-yard head start. And along that head start, that person picks up education, housing, hospitals, food, you name it. And then those that are left behind are not afforded the same opportunities. So to me, housing represents the foundation of livelihood. And so it's extremely important to me. So that's one hat I wear. I also am a consultant and coach in diversity, equity and inclusion, leadership development, and I have been supporting the city of San Rafael for many years behind the scenes. I have been on the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce, have chaired the board. So I'm intimately connected to the experiences of San Rafael and glad to play a role here with all of you. That's myself. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lorenzo. Cesar?
Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Cesar Legneva. I'm a longtime Moreno resident, originally from the Philippines, immigrated here in 1978, where I grew up in the Canal neighborhood from 78 till about mid-90s, and settled in Gersel Park neighborhood, and then early 2000 in Terra Linda neighborhood, where I currently reside. I currently serve on the Fair Housing Advocates Northern California Board, as well as NAMI. I am a 23-year former county employee as a clinical social worker. In my last 5 years there, I served as an equity officer for our county's behavioral health care system. And I play multiple roles and different hats in the community. Let's see, foster parent for a long time, 15 years back in the day. Currently, I am a consultant on DEI related topics and organizational development. I have my own clinical private practice, and I'm an adjunct professor at Dominican University, and it's good to be here.
Terrific. Thank you. Welcome. Okay, Amy. Hi, Amy.
Hey, how are you, Barry? I'm an educator, a retired French and Spanish teacher. I'm currently helping out San Rafael High School this week, teaching AP Spanish and Language and Literature 1 to native Spanish speakers. I'm a Chicago native, actually from Deerfield, Illinois. You may know of Deerfield. I grew up as a child as part of a community that was attempting to integrate. And there's a famous book that a friend of ours wrote called But Not Next Door, Morris Milgram. Anyway, so I moved to California, 20-ish years ago, and to this area about 11 years ago. I've been a renter and a homeowner. And when I first came here, it was clear to me that in order to, that this was a city that really required engagement. And so I got involved right away. I joined the Gerstle Park Neighborhood Association, and then Hugo Landecker encouraged that I join the Federation. I became the president of the GPNA for 6 years, and the Federation I've been for at least 6 years. But anyway, so I'm involved with neighborhoods, and I think you'll find that that my lens really is through that of community. I am not interested in seeing people stacked up and squeezed into areas. I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that in order to have happy children, good students, that you need to be in a living situation where you can thrive. And so I take a close look, as Allie knows, at projects, and I really am very interested in they being quality projects. I'm a parent of 4 adult children, and so I look at life also through the lens includes historic preservation. The downtown area, just like Linda, is very dear to me, and I've worked very hard on the San Rafael Heritage Board to help maintain the beautiful historic buildings that we have. And I'm also an environmentalist, and I have been from the start. In Wisconsin, I was the chair of the Sierra Club in southeastern Wisconsin, and I worked very closely with my cohorts, Bill Carney and Kate Powers and people like that in Marin. I feel extremely lucky to live here. I love this area. I'm so grateful to all of you for being engaged. I think that makes the difference in the quality of life here. Thank you, Barry.
Thanks. Great. Let's go to Diana.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Barry, and thank you to all of you for the opportunity to participate in this work with all of you. I'm a longtime resident of Marin County. I've lived in West Marin and Stinson Beach for a little while, for quite a while in Bolinas and in Point Reyes, then in Novato, and then in Fairfax, and then I finally ended up in San Rafael, which I've made my home. And I think of San Rafael as kind of the heart of Marin County. I've raised my kids here. I have 7 children and 13 grandchildren. And what I'm experiencing is, as I've gotten older and become an older adult, that it's more and more difficult to continue to live here. It's extremely expensive, and it's also very difficult for my children to live here and establish themselves. And so I think it's essential in any work that we do moving forward that we think about people all across the intergenerational thinking in terms of housing, I think is essential. I also think that you cannot have a healthy community unless people who are working here in Marin can live here. So there's so many issues and there's so many dimensions to the world of housing that having an opportunity to take a look at it, to learn how the housing element works, how housing is allocated, the history of how housing is developed in Marin is an extraordinary opportunity, and I'm very grateful to be with you all here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Rena?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rena Lopez. I have rented my residence in San Rafael for 30 years. Professionally, I'm a civil environmental engineer for the City and County of San Francisco, the Department of Environment. I'm also serving the Racial Equity Steering Committee for the City of San Francisco. I want to give you a little background on what I do. My role at the Department of Environment is to offer technical support and financial incentives for energy efficiency upgrades to business and multifamily property owners. I'm passionate about finding solutions to deliver a comprehensive energy efficiency service and maintenance programs for disadvantaged communities. Why I'm here to involve with all of you is I would like to see the City of San Rafael address the important issues of equitable future for all residents. Throughout the region, the gap between those who can afford housing and those who cannot continues to widen. And I really support continue the effort responsibly streamlined to development the process while preserving the character of San Rafael. Additionally, I would like to uphold existing policies like mandatory mediation, cause for evictions, source of income discrimination, and state and city rental regulations. I'm looking forward to work with all of you, and thank you.
Great, thank you, welcome. Let's go to Tom Monahan.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. I'm having trouble with my camera for some reason, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So I'm a almost 40-year resident of San Rafael. My wife and I have lived in Lucas Valley for all that time and raised our family here. I'm a for-profit developer. Our company is based in downtown San Rafael. We've done quite a number of both commercial and residential projects, not all over Marin County, but several in downtown San Rafael. And I'm very much a pro-housing advocate and very happy to be invited to this forum, and hopefully can provide some perspective from the point of view of a developer trying to obtain entitlements and obtain financing and actually get projects built. We recently just completed a project on 2nd and B Street, which was a 41-unit multifamily rental project. It included 6 below market rate units. And we, after a long time of approvals, we finally got that built and occupied earlier this year. So we're very excited. We have several other projects that are in various stages in the pipeline for downtown. So I'm very excited to be included with the group and look forward to working with everyone.
Great, thank you, Tom. And John Prabhatali?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, as Ali alluded to, I'm driving right now, but I'm being very safe, so I'm not following along with the screen. But yeah, my background is, well, I'm one of the planning commissioners for the city of San Rafael. So I'm the liaison from the planning commission to the housing element group. And I've been in San Rafael. My wife and kids moved here, and I moved here about 2.5 years ago from San Francisco. We live in Terra Linda. We are homeowners. The first home that we've bought, and yeah, it's hard to say exactly, how I first became interested in housing, but I think at the root of it, I am a huge advocate for fairness, and I've recently, as part of the planning commission work, I've studied the history of housing, and in California and across the United States, and as people I'm sure know, really there's been a tremendous amount of discrimination against non-whites, and that's something that a problem that I'd like to help fix. I consider myself a futurist and a problem solver, and I think that now is a great time to address some of the issues of discrimination and help integrate the communities, and housing is a great way to do that. I'm also particularly interested in education, and I realize that housing and where a person lives oftentimes influences the education, the level of education, the quality of education that they can attain. And so I'm very interested in bringing non-white communities into the historically white neighborhoods of San Francisco, so their children can get better access to education, and vice versa. Helping to diversify the historically diverse communities in in San Rafael and Marin County in general, and essentially desegregate them so they too can experience the benefits of having an integrated community. I think that's probably enough about myself, but I really look forward to working with everyone.
Great, thank you, John. Daniel?
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Ryan. I was born and raised in Marin County. Went to high school in downtown San Rafael. Happy to be on this committee today. Currently, I work with EAH Housing, who's an affordable housing developer, as a senior project manager. I've been doing affordable housing development for about 10 years now. Before that, I got a master's of city and regional planning at University of Pennsylvania before coming back to my home in Marin. I, currently sitting in my office in San Rafael at EAH, looking at my computer, thinking about ways to build housing, ways to make housing more equitable, and meetings like this is certainly one of the first steps in achieving that goal. So really happy to be here.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Let's go to Joanne and then we'll come back to Don.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joanne Webster. I am president and CEO of the San Rafael Chamber of Commerce. And I live in my home with my husband, Charlie, in Fairfax, where we raised our 2 daughters. But I have been working in and serving the city of San Rafael for over 30 years. My husband and I moved here in 1988 to open up a business on 4th Street, which we owned and operated for 23 years. I became the director of the Downtown Merchants Association, which they call the Business Improvement District, for 10 years prior to joining the chamber. The chamber made the production of new housing units a priority focus even before the pandemic. Our employers couldn't retain and recruit employees. They were driving long distances, sitting in traffic for hours. It was causing mental and physical distress, and it was a quality of life. So we would really like our local workforce to be able to live closer to their jobs. If you all remember the flood that we had a couple of years ago where Highway 37 was closed down, our garbage couldn't get picked up, our teachers couldn't get to work, our caregivers couldn't get to work. When our students can't go to school, then our employees can't go to work. So, I mean, these are just the disruptions that having housing, having our employees commute long distances cause. Somebody had mentioned the health of our community. We truly believe that having our local workforce live here and having a sense of community is really valuable. So I look forward to working with you all.
Great, thank you, Joanne. And Don, we skipped over you at the beginning, but if you'd like to share your background and maybe provide a brief introduction about your connection to housing in San Rafael.
Sure. First of all, sorry that I've been having internet connections and it seems to fade in and out. So if I disappear, that's what's going on. I'm Don Dickinson. I'm a longtime county resident. I'm actually a product of Marin County Schools. I graduated from Nevada, went to Drake.
Uh-oh. Looks like Don is frozen, unless I am, so. We'll give this another couple of seconds.
The planning director for the city of Mill Valley, where I was for 16 or 17 years. And during that time, I actually wrote the 1980s version of the city housing element. I was project manager for 2 housing projects owned by the city. We worked with Bridge to build 32 units at Pickleweed and 17 units at Alto Station. since I retired, I spent 2 years on the county grand jury, and then the last 19 years, I've been a Marin County Planning Commissioner, first representing the first district, San Rafael, and then more recently an at-large member. I've been a resident of the San Rafael neighborhood for 42 years now. And over the years, I've been involved with various environmental organizations, including being on the executive committee of the Sierra Club. I was one of the board members of what was People for Open Space. It became Greenbelt Alliance a long time ago now. And I've spent a lot of time serving on the Marin Conservation League board. And currently I'm a board member of the Marin Open Space Trust.
Great, thank you, Don. And thanks to everyone. I think we've heard from everyone on the screen at this point and appreciate your sharing those comments with us. And it looks like we've got a fantastic committee here. I'm really excited to be working with all of you. And again, thank you all for your time this evening and at our future meetings. And I did want to say, you know, we intended this evening's meeting to be, we called it a meet and greet. We wanted to kind of get a soft start here because when we convene in January, we're going to be diving in to the housing element itself and getting into some, you know, some content. This really was intended to provide, you know, an opportunity for us to meet each other, learn a little bit about each other's background, and then learn a little bit about the project itself and what we're doing in the housing element update. So I'm just going to ask Ali or Jacob if you wanted to make any additional comments before we move on to the next item, which is the presentation.
I don't have any other comments to make, Barry.
Okay.
Neither do I. Thanks, Barry. You can go ahead and
Great.
present.
Great, thanks. So we will do, Jacob and I are going to do a presentation. At this point, we're going to share the screen and walk through a PowerPoint, provide some context for the housing element and a little bit about our process, and then have some conversation with all of you, questions or feedback or thoughts you may have about this. We do have an opportunity on this agenda for public comment. I will say this is what we're doing through this working group is kind of a hybrid between a technical group and a citizens group or a community group in terms of our format. So we are doing Brown Act type meetings with public invited to attend, and there will be public comment at each meeting. But we're not set up with a chair and you know, sort of a vice chair and some of the other conventions that you may be used to because of the limited duration of this group. At this point, we are still planning on only having 6 meetings of the working group. It's going to be pretty intense. And we're looking at that January to May period as when we're going to be doing our, you know, all of our future meetings. But bear with us because we're kind of experimenting with this as well. And of course, the Zoom format is great under the circumstances, but we wish we could all be meeting with you in person, and maybe we will by the end of the process, but we'll see where that goes. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go through a PowerPoint. Okay. And let me first confirm everyone can see the screen and we're all good. Okay.
That's good, Barry.
Thank you. So there are a lot of slides in this presentation. We're actually going to go pretty quickly through a lot of the content because this is familiar to many of you, and we'd like to spend as much time as we can in conversation rather than presentation. But bear with us. We think we've already introduced ourselves, so I'm going to skip through this. You know who we are. And we're going to talk a little bit about the housing element, the context for the housing element update, which we're calling here the housing crisis, and talk a little bit about the current housing element, which covers 2015 to 2023, and then the update process, including the expectations for the working group. So we're going to jump in with the overview of the housing element. So this is again, many of you are familiar with this. The housing element is not new. It's actually been a state law that every city and county in California have a housing element as part of their general plan since 1969. It is a part of the general plan, and each community must demonstrate through its housing element that it's doing its fair share to plan for adequate, affordable housing in the community. This is the only part of the general plan that must be submitted to a state agency for certification, and that state agency is the Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. And the requirements have become much stronger and more extensive in recent years. The housing element really stands on its own as an independent planning document, and although it's part of the general plan, because it is so detailed and there is so much content in the element, it really, it is its own document. It's also updated every 8 years on a schedule that's set by the state legislature. So we have just finished the update of General Plan 2040, but it didn't include a housing element update because the housing element update needs to be completed by January 15th, 2023 by state law. And that is for all cities and all counties in the Bay Area. It's interesting in this case, we have the Southern California cities have already gone through their housing element updates. Theirs were due on October 15th, so we can learn a little bit from them in terms of what the state is looking for and what it takes to get a compliance determination. The stakes are higher and the threshold is a lot higher. So at the end of the day, what the element is it is a statement of our goals, policies, objectives, resources, and programs for preserving, improving, and developing housing in the community with a particular focus on affordable housing and housing that's equitably allocated. The process, you've heard this acronym before, many of you. We have on this working group, RENA with an I, and we have RENA with an H here. This is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, and it's essentially a top-down process where the state determines what the housing need is in each region of California. And then the Council of Governments, which in our case is ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, takes that total number and distributes it across the 101 cities and 9 counties of the Bay Area using a formula that takes into consideration things like population, employment, projected growth, job growth, and the high resource or the level of resources in each community, with high resource communities getting larger numbers assigned to them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. Once those assignments are made, then each local government needs to update their housing element and demonstrate that they can provide for the number of units that's been assigned to them. And when we say provide for the number of units, we're talking about designating specific sites on a map that can accommodate housing up to whatever level has been assigned to that community. And again, there's more there too. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So in San Rafael, we have an assignment of 3,220 units. There's been a lot of attention on the fact that that's almost 3 times, it's more than actually, well, it was 1,007 units in the last cycle. So 3 times more in this cycle. But I have to thank Linda Jackson for pointing out to me that we've been making a big deal about that, but the number was actually 2,000 in earlier cycles. So it went down in the mid 2000s. Now it's going back up again. The current allocation really is, it takes into consideration not only the current need, but the housing that we didn't build in the last cycle. So the way the state is doing the RENA allocations now is it's saying not only how much do we need for the next 8 years, it's how backlogged are we with what we didn't build. And in an environment like the one we're in, where there's been very rapid job growth, that number has very high. So the regional need went from 180,000 units in the last cycle to 440,000 units in this cycle, in part because we haven't really built the housing that we need. The other thing about this is that we have a larger percentage of our units are in the low and very low income categories. And you can see when we're talking about low and very low income housing, we're talking about our workforce here. And for a family of 4, you can earn up to $146,000 a year and still be considered low income. So we're talking about housing for many professions that, those folks can't afford to live in San Rafael today. And so this is, ownership housing, rental housing for all of the market, but looking at the particular need for low and very low income housing. We're going to talk for a moment about how we got here. And I think, Jake, at this point, you're going to walk us through the next set of slides, and I can follow your cue on advancing the slides.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. I'm not going to spend too much time on each slide. I think many of us know how we got here, but I would like the group, as part of your homework assignment for the next meeting, next slide, Barry, to have a look at this presentation along with the reading materials that we provided and really kind of absorb and ask us questions about this material. But essentially how we got here is that we've had too little amount of housing has been built, and it hasn't kept pace with the job growth, with jobs, and the rents have not, they have far eclipsed what people can foreseeably pay. And that's what we've seen here in these slides. Go to the next slide, Barry. That it's really just echoing, that theme echoes through all of the data, that across the board, whether it's just total number of units, whether it's units within each income category, whether it's the number of people that are homeless in need of services on our streets, there's a real imbalance that we need to look at from a regional perspective and a local perspective. And I really appreciate, next slide, Barry, all of the comments and the thoughts from the working group and members of the working group and the interest in looking at what that imbalance is and finding ways to resolve and find balance. I think that this one in and of itself, I think tells us so much. If we look between 2020 and 2021, and you see a major spike in value of housing during the pandemic, when many households were struggling to live, this is one of the biggest issues for me, that we have what I describe as a K-shaped economy, where people that had before the pandemic now have more, and people that didn't have before the pandemic now have less. And if we're trying to work within a market that has that sort of polarity to it, we need to find some real good balance that brings this back into reason. So I'm not certain if I would agree, given at the beginning of the pandemic, that I would have projected that housing would have gained in value throughout over the course of these last 2 years, but it certainly has, which is now further exacerbating our problem here, the challenge. Next slide, Barry. So I think Barry has already illustrated this fact that just simply, it just makes it hard for anybody to live here, short of, folks that are earning a really high value, high salary. And that means that people are going to be commuting in long distances to, provide those great jobs and services that the community really, folks appreciate. Next slide, Barry. So, on the flip side, when we realize that the benefits of increasing our housing choices are multifold, and in fact, I think maybe, as we're going along, we can identify what some more of those values are for our community and really try to really suss out and define all of the, the values and benefits that housing bring to the community. But here's just a couple that, for first-time home buyers, for being able to remain in the community, to be able to retire, et cetera. Go ahead, Barry, next slide. So one of your materials that we're asking you to read in your reading packet, it is the current housing element. We will be prompting you with some questions in the first meeting around that. And there might be some homework today about sussing out some of the programs and what's good, what's working and what's not. So next slide, Barry. So that program, that element was for the years of 2015 to 23. And it had a number of current strategies, which we're going to ask you to dig into. And we're going to explore whether they worked well, if they didn't, and how we should update them, what we need to add to really be representative of where we need to be for housing. Next slide, Barry. We also have 2 goals in our current housing element. Now, in the document you'll read, it's their goal number 3 and goal number 4. And that's because the general plan at the time had numbered goals 1, 2, and then the housing were 3 and 4. So we have changed the numbering within the 2040 general plan. And so we will be changing those numbers, but please have a look at these goals as well as you read that housing element and take notes, because we want to hear from you on what our full set of goals should be for the next housing element cycle. Next slide, Barry. Now, as a little primer, our current structure and the structure that we're going to be looking at is that we have a goal, and that goal is subtended, or it's below the goal as an objective. The objective is intended to, it's a statement that gets us towards our goal. Below that is a policy that is closer to defining what the action is, but it's not as vague as an objective. It's not as visionary as the goal. And then below the policy is the program. Now, the program is that action and the action plan. That is the things that we are going to be taking, the moves that we're going to be making to achieve the policy that implements the objective that attains the goal. Now, Barry, do you have the next slide? Is that right?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just talk to the general plan 2040 and how this all fits together. I mentioned during my early introductory remarks that we had just completed General Plan 2040, which is the long-range plan for San Rafael. Part of that process was updating the land use map for the city, and that included creating a new plan for the downtown area, which is called the Downtown Precise Plan. There are some new components to how that downtown plan will work that create more capacity for development. What's called a form-based code that takes density out of the equation and takes floor area ratio out of the equation. And some of the things that have maybe constrained the number of housing units that could be put on a property, at least within downtown, have changed now. And we're hoping that that will make it easier, at least to build in downtown. We can look through this process at applying some of those standards to other parts of the city. I think the point here is that going through the general plan update has created the capacity for the city to meet its regional housing needs allocation of 3,200 units. We have identified sites that can hold 4,400 units, and I want to say that's a conservative number. The actual number is quite a bit higher than that, but we don't know how realistic all of those properties are and how feasible it will be that they redevelop in the next 8 years, which is the time frame for this this housing element. But we're in a better position than some of the other communities in Marin County in that we have the capacity, we have the land zoned for housing. The challenge here is how do we actually get it built? And why isn't it getting built? And what are the things the city can do to remove some of the obstacles or make it more viable? We know we can't control everything, but there are definitely steps that the city can take. And so a lot of what we'll be looking to you, particularly those of you who are in the development world to help us out with, is understanding some of those obstacles. And Jake, you were going to go through the next couple, I think.
Yeah, thank you. And that's great. I appreciate that background for this slide. So when you have a moment to look through the reading materials, please take a moment to look at this slide. It's really, it's describing what we do, what we're going to be doing through the working group. It's looking at our housing element as a living document, as both a document that we use to implement our goals and a means of evaluating and updating and refreshing those goals if they're not meeting the target. So right now, we are looking at, as we look through our element and we identify, we evaluate all the progress that we've made over the last 8 years, we're going to be looking to you, the group, to help us identify, again, what's working well, what isn't working well, what else do we need in this element. We're going to be looking at the outcomes. We're going to be measuring success, and then we're going to be turning that wheel. And the intent here is that we may do that several times through this next element cycle. Certainly every year when we come back to the council with an annual update of the housing element, we can be looking at, what we've made, what successes we've created, and what we could be doing differently. Next slide, please, Barry. Now, we're also going to be looking at how we can center our actions in equity. And this is a graphic that I pulled down, I believe, off of the ABAG's website. We're going to be looking and exploring ways where we can create or introduce a racial equity toolkit, bringing people in at the floor, making sure that people that are affected have a place at the table, that the working group or it hears from racial minorities, from BIPOC, from API individuals in the community, from immigrants, that they feel that they have a part in the decision making around the document, that we're able to evaluate our programs, our goals, our policies in terms of creating harm, or alternatively improving the situation, and then that we have a means of reporting back and measuring success. Next slide, Barry. Now, part of this I've mentioned, I've alluded to a couple of times, is annually sharing our successes and our challenges. And part of our engagement that we're going to be working on in the first part of this next year is doing just that, is coming out to the community with listening conversations, community conversations, where we share our successes and identify perhaps some of our challenges, and that we hear back from the community and listen to what the needs are. I think it's really important for us that we always recognize that the RHNA number, it's not a goal. This is a floor. This is a minimum goal that we're supposed to attain, that we certainly could be going above and beyond that. And as we hear from the community, we may in fact hear from the community, and that the needs might be greater than RHNA. Next slide, Barry.
Great.
Now, Barry, are you jumping in at this point on this part?
I am. Yeah, I think I will walk through the next batch of slides here. So we're really shifting the focus of the presentation to the contents of the housing element and our update process. So what you see here on the slide is really kind of, I think, common to every housing element in California. And this is really where you see the government code requirements expressed here. Every housing element that you pick up, no matter what the community, no matter what size the community, has these basic components, and they're state mandated. So you see an evaluation of the prior housing element. In this case, that's the element that was adopted by the City Council in 2015 that laid out a series of programs. We first evaluate how we're doing. Are we accomplishing what we said we were going to accomplish? If we're not, why not? Was it money? Was it the market? Was it that we didn't have the resources to take certain actions? So that's really where we're going to focus our next working group meeting, is on that conversation about how did we do and how can we do better? And that really kind of sets the stage for what is our vision for the future of housing in San Rafael. Next, there's a needs assessment. And this is, for those of you who like data, you'll enjoy this reading material. It's a deep dive into our demographics and our housing conditions, and looks at things like the age distribution, ethnicity and language, household composition, the size of our households, overcrowding, how much people are paying for rent, and what percentage of their income, trends in the housing market, and so on. The constraints analysis looks at all of the obstacles to building housing, and those can be government constraints like zoning or permitting processes or high fees, or they can be non-government constraints like the availability of water or high costs of lumber or opposition to projects in the community, and so on. So we evaluate those and look at ways those can be addressed in the future. Then there's the sites analysis, and this is where we lay out all the locations in the city where housing can be developed. We've done a lot of that through the general plan, but it hasn't really been laid out in a single place in a single document. where people can look and say, what was assumed for this site? How many units can we get on this property or that property? And what affordability levels can we expect on properties? And if it's zoned for single family housing, it's unlikely we're going to be able to meet our low and very low income targets there. So we need to have a mix of sites, and we need to demonstrate that we have a mix of sites that can accommodate not just upper income or market rate housing, but also more affordable housing. The resources analysis looks at the financial resources that are available to us, the private sector resources, the lending community resources, and so on. And then affirmatively furthering fair housing is a new requirement. We've got a couple of slides coming up on that topic. Many of you have mentioned the importance of equity in your comments, and that is really become the central focus of the housing element now to a much greater extent than it ever was in the past. So all of those data heavy tasks that you see on the slide feed into the goals, policies, programs, and objectives that are really the meat of the housing element. So some of the new requirements, the first three bullets on this slide really deal with how the regional housing needs assessment is calculated and how it's allocated to different cities. Essentially, if you're a higher resource city, a city that has great schools, great parks, great services, great healthcare, you get more housing units and more affordable units assigned to you. And this is really kind of a regional and state level policy shift that seeks to reduce segregation in the region and create more inclusive communities. There are new requirements for how we select our sites, what you can count. If you counted a site in the last housing element, we have some new tests we need to new standards we need to use to show that they're still viable sites for the next housing element. There are more penalties for non-compliance. So at the end of this process, if we're found to not have an adequate housing element, we could face penalties, fines, increased risk of lawsuits, and so on. So it is in the best interest of every city in California to end this process with a compliant housing element that has that state certification. And again, the affirmatively furthering fair housing is the focus of a couple of follow-up slides that I'm going to talk about now. So we call this AFFH for short. It's been a federal requirement in larger cities for a while, but it's new to the housing element. So housing elements now must include detailed analytical study of segregation in the community and where there are what we call high resource areas, low resource areas, areas that are where the population is more vulnerable and subject to displacement due to rising costs. We need to look at our history as a city and how we got to where we got. We can't just do an analysis of data and say, okay, we've completed the task. We actually have to look at how this happened. You know, whether it was covenants that existed on housing in earlier generations and so forth. But this is something that the state requires we do in great detail. It is all in support of the Fair Housing Act and of equity goals. There are some objectives you see here, and I do want to point out, because I've just done the AFFH analysis for another city. It's really interesting. It's really difficult also. I think both in terms of the data that when you're presented with the data, of course, the question is, how do we fix this? You know, we have a situation where we have a segregated city or where we've grown in certain patterns. How do we rectify that and overcome these historic patterns and become more economically integrated and inclusive in the future? That's really a challenge, and we're glad to have you here as a working group to help guide us through the answer to that question and come up with realistic solutions. We'll be talking more about the AFFH at future meetings, and we have a number of other resource folks we'd like to bring in to help guide that conversation. I do want to say that AFFH is not just about analysis and problem solving, it's also about how we do this housing element. We can't just hold a community workshop in English and have 10 people or 20 people attend. we need to be proactive about reaching out to communities that don't typically participate and presenting material in other languages, and also selecting our housing sites in a way that support the objective of affirmatively furthering fair housing, which means that we can't cluster all of our affordable housing in one location. We actually have to quantifiably demonstrate that we've distributed housing across the city. So this really just talks about ways we can achieve our goals. I think we'll be talking more about this in future meetings. Education is a big part of this process. As I mentioned, it's the way we do our outreach. It's not just for the housing element. It's really, I think, a more systemic change in how the city operates. And you'll hear more about this in city council discussions, really looking at how to make equity a more fundamental principle in the way the city plans and delivers services. So I mentioned our engagement program. We are developing a number of tools right now to do outreach. We have a Spanish language outreach program that we're launching, and we're about to do a community survey. We'll be holding a number of community conversations about housing in the period between January and April. In addition to that, we'll be doing some of the more familiar and traditional outreach in efforts, such as going to stakeholder organizations. Joanne, we would love to come to the chamber and talk to your land use committee and be there. We've talked to the Federation, and we'll continue to make presentations and hear from our community partners. I think partners with our stakeholders and our stakeholder organizations is going to be really critical, not just to get to put together the housing element, but to implement the housing element and to come up with programs that are realistic. Okay, a couple of final slides. This one just goes over your role as a working group member. We do have an attachment in the agenda packet that lays out what the expectations are for the working group. We'd love for you to participate in every meeting. Hopefully you'll be able to attend all of our meetings. We'll be sending you documents in advance of each meeting, ideally, 5 to 7 days ahead of time. And we'll be asking you to look over some material, look at our reading list, look at things that we'll be sending you, and provide some guidance and recommendations when we have these discussions. Programs that should be included. You all represent a lot of knowledge and a lot of diverse interests and groups. And I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you as we move there. And then reviewing the final draft. Also, I think spreading the word, I think that's really a matter of staying in touch with the organizations that you're connected to and letting them know about this process and helping get input from them and bringing it back to this forum so that we can hear from the from the individuals and the folks that you represent. And this may not apply to all of you, but for those of you who are here on behalf of an organization. The working group meetings, we've laid out a tentative schedule for January through May. And I think the final slide in this presentation does talk about why we're producing this document in May when it's not due until January of 2023. We'll explain that in just a minute. But we have tentatively set up an agenda for January, February, March, April, and May. We will likely have 2 meetings during the month of March. We would love to just say we're going to have 6 meetings and end in June, but we actually are working against some fairly tough deadlines. And I want to point out the state adopted legislation in September of 2021 that actually changed our schedule. They accelerated the city's process and slowed down the state's process, which we thought was unfair. But anyway, we have less time than we thought we did to produce this draft. So the reason we need to have a draft done by May is this is actually a 2-step process. We need to produce a draft housing element, bring it through the Planning Commission and City Council, and then submit it to the state for review. They have 90 days to review our draft, and then they provide us with comments on that draft. We need to respond to those comments edit the document, and then bring it back to the Planning Commission and City Council for adoption by January 2023. So there's this kind of 2-cycle process that we that require that we be ready by May. So I'm going to close with that, and we'll open it up for questions and comments. I see Amy has her hand up, and maybe we can start with Amy and then take questions and comments from other members.
Thank you, Barry, and thanks for that great slideshow. As we pick up on issues, combing through the housing element, et cetera, the reading list that you give us, you've given just now a slide with the housing as an email. How do you folks, what is the best way to communicate issues that we found? Is it individual emails to the housing or do you want to wait until we get together and we talk about this as a group?
I'll ask Jacob or Allie if you guys have a preference on this. I mean, I would just say copy us on anything you send to the housing email, and that way we'll get it as well. I mean, I always want to see every piece of correspondence that comes in, and we have access to that. But do you guys have a preference?
Yeah, so Alexis and I both are receiving those emails, the housing at San Rafael. And we welcome you to send us all of your thoughts to that email inbox. I think best for Alexis and I that you send it there, because we know that either she or I will see it. So please do use that housing at cityofsanrafael.org as a great place to send all of your comments. We're hoping also that you can bring those comments to the meetings, because a real important aspect of the working group is to share those thoughts with the other members so that we're generating some great conversation.
I guess as a follow-up, do you want to just like open up the housing element for our comments, the current housing element for our comments, or would you rather have it in a more structured fashion? We're going to look at this section and then this section, so that you don't get random emails out.
So have a look at the meeting schedule. That's the structure where we're going to, that's the structure for the meetings and the conversations that the working group will have. So for instance, this first one, the first meeting in January, the group will be looking at the existing housing element and the major accomplishments and discussing the vision and the goals for the element. And so, that would be great to have any of your thoughts around that. But certainly, Amy, if you want to if you're motivated and you want to send us thoughts, Alexis and I will sift through it.
Yeah, if I can add to that too, Amy, I would say at this point, the focus, if anything, if you're prioritizing what to look at, it's the goals, policies, and actions.
Right.
You don't necessarily have to reread the needs assessment because we're redoing it now. You don't have to look at the sites inventory because we're redoing it now. We will give you the new site assessment in March to look at, but right now we're really focused on the goals, objectives, policies, and actions, which is one chapter of the housing element. It's about 30 pages long. And, so you don't have to read the whole 200-page document at this one moment in time, if that helps.
Right.
Okay, and a couple of other hands are up. I'm just going to call on you, and please speak, Joanne.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks both to you and Jacob for that great presentation. I have one question and a comment. The question is, I'm familiar, or I've heard extremely low category with RENA numbers. So is that, something that's just, we don't have to build extremely low, or it's just considered part of the low? So that was my question. I don't know if you want to answer that prior to my comment.
Why don't I? Yeah, I'll do that now. So extremely low is not part of the RENA, but it is part of the housing element. So basically we take the very low assignment and that gets split into extremely low and the rest of very low. And extremely low is households earning less than 30% of area-wide median. And the remainder of the very low is 30 to 50% of area-wide median. And so extremely low is where we address unsheltered residents or others with very limited income. And there are numeric thresholds that define what extremely low is. So yeah, that's an important part of the community that we're serving.
Great, thanks. And my comment is the city and the chamber actually a couple of years ago commissioned a report to identify the obstacles to building housing in San Rafael. And I think it would be helpful prior to, I think it's the constraints meeting, if the group were to receive that report and it was part of the reading. And then also it would be really great to get an update on some of the ordinances and some of the programs that the city has taken on relative to addressing what those obstacles are, so that we don't have spend a whole lot of time talking about them when the city has already addressed them, moving forward for the next element.
Great, thank you.
And feel free to share that resource with us. We'll add it to the reading list.
Right.
Barry,
and really,
before we go into, I know John has his hand raised. I did want to also mention that, we have some members in this group that are very familiar with the general plan and the housing element and can easily get to the policies, goals chapter. But before we end this meeting, perhaps you can identify what the page number or maybe even the chapter number, so that as everybody else is looking for that particular section, they know where to go.
Sure, yeah, and I'll send it out as well. Yeah, we'll do that. I see John and then Linda. So let's go with John.
Thank you. I'll try to be really quick. You mentioned unsheltered people. Yeah, and I know that we've seen an increase in the number of homeless people in San Rafael, and using San Francisco kind of as a proxy. I know a lot of those folks, I think 70% of the homeless people in San Francisco were former housed people, residents of San Francisco that were evicted. And so I'm just wondering if we could get some data on the homeless population in San Rafael, case studies, maybe projections for how that increase in housing costs may affect the homeless population, and also a quick snapshot on what the current sort of like situation is around protections for renters. I believe we don't have rent control like San Francisco does, but even with rent control in San Francisco, they're still having this huge eviction problem. So that's my request.
Great. Thank you, John. And I should point out the one missing member from our working group who couldn't be here tonight is Andrew Henning, who is the, what I'm not sure of what his title was, Ali, when he was with the city homeless program manager. Is that right?
Yeah, he was a director of homelessness planning and outreach.
He's now with Opening Doors Marin. He's actually on paternity leave right now, but he'll be back in January, and is going to be a good resource for us as we gather data and also develop programs like what you're describing, John. Thank you. Linda?
Hi, Barry. So
Hi.
I come with 3 questions, mostly process. But the first one is, in one of the graphics about the process we're going through, there's really no mention of evaluation of policies. It was that graphic of the loop-de-loop, the circle from ABAG, I think, and it talks about programs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming we're doing policies as well, but hope that it sounds like we can review and give feedback on that. So that's just the first question. The second one is, as Omar had to leave and Andrew, should one of us have to miss a meeting or leave early, is it possible to send in a representative? Maybe not a full-fledged alternate, but someone who could come and listen in and then brief us afterwards, so we don't miss anything, because there's so few meetings and they're that important. And then the last one is, I get so tired being on Zoom and looking at the screen all the time, and I'm just wondering if we can get for those of us who want to get materials in 3D, if we could get paper copies to work with, it would make it a lot easier on the eyes and the brain.
Great, thanks, Linda. I think I can answer all three of those. Absolutely, yes, we are evaluating policies. I think it's critical. And for that matter, we're also evaluating goals. And I think part of what we're doing at the next meeting is revisiting our goals. Because at least for me, as I look at those two goals, I don't see that those are enough to address the range and magnitude of the issues, or else they're too high or abstract. But I'm hoping that we as a group can really flesh out the goals and policies as well as the programs. The question about alternates, we're not doing formal alternates, but I think on a case-by-case basis, if you can't make a meeting and need to send someone who can speak to that, I think we'll be all right with that, given the scope of what we're doing. And don't want to go on record as saying absolutely positively, but we'll talk about that, and I think we can accommodate that. We also want to do whatever we can to make sure you're at the meeting, so we'll do that too. And yeah, we can arrange for paper copies. I think if we know in advance that you'd like a paper copy, we'll just make a copy and keep it up at the front counter, and you can pick it up. It's easier if you can pick it up at City Hall than having it mailed.
Can't you just email us the documents ahead of time? I don't want to jump.
Oh yeah, I mean, we can definitely do that too. It sounded like, yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a printer, so it'd be easier to swing by and pick something up than to go to Kinko's.
Right.
If you would, do us a favor, and if you do want to receive your materials in some other way besides an email or a link, send that to housing@cityofsanrafael.org, and Alexis and I will make a list.
Great. There is one kind of housekeeping issue that we have on the agenda that I want to make sure we have time for. It's going to be pretty quick. It's just with regard to our future meeting dates. Let me, given that we have 9 minutes. Yeah.
Can I just really quickly add, just because we were taking comments, and there is a comment in the chat by Cesar Lagliva. Lagliva, Cesar, is that how you pronounce your name? Just recommending The Color of Law, which is a book about redlining and segregation. And he's recommending the reading if there's time, if any of you have time to do that. Sorry, Cesar, say that again. How do you pronounce your last name?
Lagliva.
Lagliva. Okay, great. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And
I've captured the comment.
Okay. Thank you, Ali, and thanks, Cesar, for the recommendation. Are there any other comments? We do have public comments still also, and then the other item is just really a question for the working group about meeting times. I'm just looking around to see if anyone. Okay. The issue with meeting dates and topics, thank you all for responding to that quick survey we sent out for your first, second, and third choices for meeting dates. The unfortunate thing is that there was no one time that worked for everyone. And some of you had indicated that particular date was your third choice, and others had indicated there were certain dates you could not make at all because you had other standing commitments. So we're in a little bit back to the drawing board on that, but I did want to just pose one question to the group, which is, if we looked at a meeting time that was not 6 to 8 p.m., but that was 4 to 6 p.m. or possibly even noon to 2 p.m., would that be a possibility for any of you, all of you, some of you? We're sort of looking for what's the best solution, given that we can't find a date where we're all available, and I'm open to ideas. But our first one was, well, let's try 4 to 6 p.m. instead of 6 to 8 p.m. And I wanted to see if that would pose a conflict for any of you.
Barry, from my point of view, this is Tom Monahan. 4 to 6 p.m. is fine.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
I'm Rina Lopez, and 4 to 6 p.m. works for me too.
Okay, great. Let me ask, is there anyone for whom 4 to 6 would not work? I'm happy to see no hands going up, and hopefully, John, we can't see you, but hopefully that works for you as well. We'll send something out again with the same dates, but with the 4 to 6 window open, and see what we get when we try that. And thanks for bearing with us on that. So we do have public comment on our agenda, and I'm going to ask if anyone who is in the attendees area would like to make a comment or speak or address the working group. If you could use the raise hand feature, we'll bring you over to make a comment. And I see Bob Pendoli. And let's see if I can do this. Hi, Bob. Welcome. We can hear you.
Oh, great. This is a wonderful presentation tonight. Would you be able to link the PowerPoint online? Some other place where we can access it?
Yes, absolutely. It will be there tomorrow. We'll be putting the presentation up, and then this meeting is being recorded, and so we'll be putting the recording up as well.
Yeah, super. Thanks.
Sure thing. Okay. Anyone else who is in the attendees area wish to make a comment or speak? Okay, and as I mentioned, we're going to be allowing for public comment at the beginning of the meeting and the end of the meeting in the future, just to make it a little easier for those who wish to make a comment. Great. There's also an opportunity here for any other announcements or comments that folks would like to make. And before we close, I'll just kind of open it up to everyone. Any last parting thoughts before we wrap up? And then we'll see you in January, date TBD. Hopefully we'll determine the date by the end of this week. Lorenzo, yeah.
I just want to commend you all in the city of San Rafael for taking on this huge initiative and involving all of us that are on the call. As you know, building and getting affordable housing built can be a challenge, and some cities aren't open to it. And we certainly, as Daniel can attest to, there is a lot of resistance in some communities for whatever reasons that they choose. So I'm just really honored and pleased that San Rafael is putting a stake in the ground to help solve this crisis in our community. So thank you.
Thank you.
I second that sentiment.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Nice to hear that. See that
Okay.
Joanne had her hand raised.
I hate to ruin this wonderful moment, but I do have a housekeeping question. If we were in person as the panelists, we would know who was in the room. Is there any way going forward we can tell who is viewing as a panelist, to know who's watching?
I can see that but I don't know if that's because I'm a co-host. If you click on participants and it opens the window on the side, at least what I'm seeing is one column for panelists and another for attendee.
Ah, yes, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Yep.
And thank you to our attendees. Any other comments? We're at 5:58 p.m., so we're going to be wrapping just about on time.
Well, if there's other comments from the group, I did want to leave us with a little bit of homework, as I kind of alluded to in the presentation. So please do your reading materials, read through those materials. And I just posted a couple of questions. We will send an email out, but at their next meeting, let's be ready to share at least one program that's working well, one that's not working well, and give some thought to, if you could just add one program or more, what would that be? Also, as I promised, we wanted to create some conversation here. And so we wanted to kind of push the envelope. And so like we want to ask questions that will generate conversation. And one of those I'd like to just put out to the group. Hopefully we can chat about this is if a residential, this is hypothetical, if a residential or a mixed use developer didn't build out a site to its fully allowed density, should the remaining unbuilt units be available as base units for, before the density bonus to other nearby properties? So we're going to design some questions for thought provoking like this. So again, thank you. We will be sending this out as an email follow-up, and we'll be looking forward to some good conversation in January.
Great. Thank you, Jacob. And thank you all. Have a great holiday, and we will see you in January.
Thank you.
Good night.
Happy holidays,
Good night.
everyone.
Good
Good night.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone, bye.
So Ali,
Yeah.
I might need your help turning the recording off. I have never done that before.
So you just leave and it saves it.
Does it go somewhere? Do we know that we don't want to lose it?
No, it goes into the cloud.
I'm going to stop it so we can stop our conversation.